So what is going on, guys? How's it going? Today, we're doing a little bit of a special stream. We're going to be diving into Darker Side. I have my world record video here, and we're going to explain what has gotten us to this point. We're going to explain what Darker Side's all about. We're going to explain what makes a Darker Side speedrun, what makes it interesting, all of the glitches and tricks that have helped chop the time down from when it used to be a world record of like 7 hours all the way to what it is now. It was kind of cool that this game has particular milestone achievements based on how many moons you have. That's where this category comes from. It's like, well, once you unlock a specific amount of moons, you get to the dark side of the moon, and once you unlock 500 power moons, you get to the darker side of the moon. And each of those has their own challenges and their own multi-moons, and kind of like a nice, perfect little stop point. And I really want to just go over this category because, in my opinion, it's probably my absolute favorite speedrunning category of this game. And that's a pretty high mark to make because this game is already my favorite, and I think all of the categories are fun, but this one is my favorite. You know, a lot of people ask questions like, what is Darker Side? Darker Side is a category that requires you to get to the darker side of the moon, which is a hidden kingdom locked behind not only the finishing of the game, but also 500 power moons. We've made it such that you can't buy duplicate moons from the shop. That's one of the major rules of the category. Now, the cool thing about Darker Side is because you need to get 500 power moons, and there's only 460-ish available to you before you beat the game, it requires post-game. And it just so happens that the post-game is extremely fast. Like, when you get into the post-game, you open up the moon rocks. The moon rocks make available to you a lot of really, really, really fast moons. The story is very important for Darker Side, and we'll explain that as we get to kingdoms that actually matter. Cascade Kingdom has had pretty big history in Super Mario Odyssey speedruns. It used to be that this category was run on 1.0, and 1.0 was the definitive version for a lot of categories because you could do a thing called first moon skip. So this first moon that we're looking at right here just so happens to be the key to continue the kingdom, right? You grab the first moon and the rest of the kingdom opens up, and it opens up a path to get to Madame Brutal. In 1.0, the very, very original version of this game, it was found that you could do a jump across this water, basically skip grabbing the first moon, get up all the way to the top of the kingdom, and fight Madame Brutal without having to collect this story moon. There are also a couple other benefits as well to playing on 1.0, and we'll get to those later on. But just know that we're playing on 1.3 now because the loads are extremely good. So the first trick that we're going to find out here is called DSS, Dino Skip Skip. I'm actually going to turn around, and I'm going to do a triple jump off this rock. This tiny little triangle on the wall that you're seeing right here, that's what we're aiming for. The idea is we can actually land on this because it is not wall, it is floor. If we dive and land right on it, we just go ahead and jump up the wall. Here, watch that again. I'm going to see if I can pause it at exactly the right time. Now, usually, when you hit a wall like that, you bonk and you fall back. But because that part of the wall is actually floor, we kind of just cheat the game. We kind of cheat the system into thinking, hey, this is a floor. You got your jump back. You got your cap bounce back. It's pretty crazy stuff. This saves about 9 seconds over going through the cutscene, watching the cutscene, going to the dino, getting the dino to skip up to Madame Brutal. Every main category can do this and save 9 seconds, but it sucks. It is not fun to do, and we're only 3 minutes and 15 seconds into this run, and doing this basically is like do or die. You either get it and you continue going, or you miss it and you go back to the beginning. This chest moon here doesn't look anything special, but you'll notice that when I approach the chest, I open it, turn around, backflip, and throw Cappy at exactly the right moment. And for some reason, this game has an interesting mechanic where during the moon grab animations, you don't have collision with walls and ceilings. And because when you backflip and cap throw, it sends Mario in wildly different directions, we can use it to our advantage. We can time a cap throw at exactly the right moment to push Mario out of bounds during this moon animation. And that's actually going to allow him to just get to places that he's not supposed to, like through the ceiling, so that we can get up here a little bit faster. It saves about 2 seconds to do that. Here's where we start to get a little bit interesting. This is a category that requires you to play in the post-game, essentially. Anything that we do in the early game usually has a reason for it later on. In this case, We're going to grab that checkpoint because we need certain amount of checkpoints, but we're also going to plant this seed. And the seed didn't really take very long to plant, so it's not a big deal. But the reason that that seed is going to get planted is because seeds in this game take 20 real-time minutes to grow. And instead of waiting 20 real-time minutes for the seeds to grow, we can just come back later, meaning we'll get a free moon as soon as we come back. So, if you have ever played this game, you know that in order to progress the story in Sand Kingdom, it forces you to go on a little bit of a path. You have to go to the top of a tower, collect a story moon. You have to go across the desert into a habitat of Moais and collect some moon shards and get a story moon there. And then the door for this pyramid opens up. Or you can just do that. Okay, so what the heck is happening here? Well, it just so happens that if you do a roll cancel, you can cancel your roll by pressing Y, followed by B. If you do it close enough to a wall that can clip through, then you just go through. And that's exactly what I did. So this trick has actually been known about for a really long time, longer than I've been playing the game. And in this category, that skips getting 2 story moons in the order that we get them casually, and it saves about 2 minutes. So kind of an important thing for the speedrun. Have I gone over Toadette yet? I should do that, actually. Toadette waits in, spoiler alert, Princess Peach's castle at the end of the game, and after you've beat the main storyline, she will give you achievement moons based on arbitrary things that you've done in the run before. Some of these examples include just beating the game. She'll give you a moon for that. Some of them include achieving world peace, like we talked about. Some of them are by a certain amount of outfits in the store, by a certain amount of hats, by a certain amount of souvenirs. One of them is jump 10,000 times. One of them is cap throw 5,000 times. But there's a lot that have to do with, like, moons in a particular category, getting a certain amount of timer challenge related moons, or getting a certain amount of moons related to burps. Certain amount of slot machine moons, yes, that's a good example too. A lot of this speedrun was taking those moons into consideration, because when you get to Toadette at the end, she hands you moons every 7.5 seconds. So if you can achieve a Toadette accomplishment, then you get a moon for free, basically, for 7.5 seconds, right? Which is really good. This guy here is Jaxie. We just kind of talk to him, we pay him 30 coins, and then we run away. Jaxie is really good at running around the kingdom, and he can run on purple poison, which avoids the instant death that Mario usually takes. So he's going to be really valuable to us later on. Now, this is the first story moon that we skipped earlier. Just so happens that there's a wire that takes us all the way through the kingdom really fast. So we use that to our advantage. We grab this story moon here. Luckily, the sequence break doesn't crash the game here at all. So we capture the story moon, and it kind of just gives us a little panoramic view of this puzzle, and then just keeps going like nothing ever happened. One thing I will critique Odyssey on is that they perhaps don't have the most exciting boss fights. A lot of them are kind of auto-scrollery, but each one does have at least one kind of speed-up mechanic. In this one, it's a little bit hidden. You're going to see that I actually roll forward across the arena in between the punching fists, and while that doesn't look like much, for some reason, getting up in his face every single time saves about 1.5 seconds each time I do it. Now, before we can leave, we have one extra thing. We need to make our way over to this little touristy guy. So there's a Toasterinen, that's what the little Day of the Dead guys are called, and he's chilling with this taxi driver. We just need to go talk to him. He is going to take a little round trip around the world. He's going to go visit a bunch of other kingdoms with us. But he is linear in his path. So if he doesn't get talked to in this kingdom, then he will not appear in the next ones. So before we can leave Sand, we just have to make sure that we talk to him. At this part of the run, we have our first fork in the road. What we choose here will affect the order of kingdoms later on. So instead of choosing Lake first, we're actually going to go to Wooded first on purpose. Not only are the kingdoms connected by the Odyssey that flies around to each of the kingdoms, but they are connected by what's called the warp painting chain. And if you enter this painting, very Super Mario 64 style, you transport yourself to another kingdom. It just so happens that the order that you choose these kingdoms now affects the order of the kingdoms later. Just like in Cascade Kingdom, when we went down to the chest moon was underneath the waterfall basin, and we used the moon inside the chest to clip up into the ceiling. We're actually going to do that again here. This moon spawns close enough to the wall that if we position ourselves in just the right way and throw Cappy at just the right time, Mario will actually just phase directly through the wall. Here, we're just using it to skip pulling a lever to open a gate. Saves about 7 seconds. Pretty cool little trick going on here. This was found actually around the same time that I started speedrunning this game, But what this game wants you to do right now is grab this P-switch right here, and it wants you to spawn a flower road that's going to come up and over to this platform. But instead of that, we're just going to build up some speed and do a triple jump across the gap in order to clear the gap. It saves about 2 seconds to do that instead. And of course, swag points. Wooded Kingdom is not done yet. In order to achieve world peace in the Wooded Kingdom, you actually need to get up to the top of the kingdom and fight another boss, but we're going to leave. And the reason that we're going to leave is because when we do that painting chain I was talking about earlier, we're actually going to come back through a painting that's really, really close to the boss fight. By doing this and leaving the boss fight for later, we actually save ourselves some time trying to climb all the way back up to the top of the kingdom. We don't have to worry about that. So, because we chose Wooded first, that means Lake is second, and we're here now. This is Rango. This is actually the only time in the entire speedrun that we fight Rango. And as you can see, he's kind of a pushover. Cool little like spin throw swag strat here to get all the coins afterwards. We beat the boss of the kingdom, we achieved world peace here. You're going to say that we'll probably leave now, right? Actually, no. Before we leave, we're going to take care of one extra thing. We're going to look at this picture on the wall. That's called a hint art. And hint arts are important because when you look at them, they spawn the location of a ground pound moon somewhere else in the world. So by looking at that picture, there is now a ground pound spot in Cascade Kingdom somewhere that if we ground pound it, we get a moon out of it, just for free. Unfortunately, we can't just remember where those positions are. We have to look at the picture first. If I was to just leave Lake Kingdom without looking at that picture, the moon would not appear in Cascade. So there's a little bit going on in this fight. It's not how you do it casually. We're going to get right up in Bowser's face, and by throwing Cappy as soon as we get up right in his face, we can actually grab the hat from him immediately. And we kind of position ourselves behind him to one of the sides so that he actually flies 2 platforms away instead of just 1. And on this last phase, we take intentional damage so that the hats flying in at us from the sides don't do it. And that's just to be able to set ourselves up for that backflip and cap throw to capture the hat. The characteristic of this kingdom is that there is a bird, and he's guarding this kingdom. And if we go the intended path, the bird is going to stop us and steal Cappy. This trick, however, was discovered pretty early on in Mario speedrunning, where we actually just jump up the side of the cliff. The bird's loading zone actually doesn't get us here. We're able to just kind of meander around this kingdom, not worrying about Klepto at all. As far as he knows, we don't even exist here, but we're actually going to get right up in his face like that, and that triggers him in a way that he doesn't initiate the cutscene and steal Cappy, but he does think that he has Cappy now, which is great, because we can actually just go ahead and continue the kingdom as normal. We're going to put Glydon in a specific place here, just the right place for us to be able to jump at this key, throw our hat back, and then dive at the key and capture Glydon at the exact same time that we would basically almost die. And that just prevents us from having to do this moon the intended way, which is very, 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 very slowly. What is the intended way? So the intended way to get this moon is to get one of those tropical wigglers that live on the other side of the kingdom. Get that tropical wiggler and bring him all the way over and stretch him into the hole to grab the key. World peace in Metro is not so simple as beating the boss, because we already did that. In order to achieve world peace in Metro, for some reason, Pauline wants us to gather things together in order for us to throw a festival for ourselves. After beating the Wiggler, we need to go and collect ourselves 4 bandmates to put a band together. And then we also need to go into the sewers. We need to clear out the gunk in the sewers to provide more power to the city in order for this festival to happen. Does Donkey Kong count as a boss? I mean, technically in this situation he does, doesn't he? So we've got the band together. Now that we've got the band together, Pauline just asks us one more thing. We need to go into the sewers, and we need to clear out the gunk that is in the sewers. These piranha plants are causing havoc back there. So we've taken care of that. We hit this giant shiny button, and that brings extra power to the city so that we're able to do the festival. And the festival is like one of the flashiest parts of the whole game, probably one of my favorite parts of the whole game. Completing the festival achieves world peace in Metro, and I don't really know why that's a characteristic, but it is. We've achieved world peace in Metro, but there's just one thing that we have to do. This is just so happens to be the first stop on our little taxi dude's journey. So we're going to go talk to him. We're going to initiate him. He gives us a power moon on each one of his stops, which is why we had to get him in the first place. Okay, so now we're in Snow. And Snow is a very interesting kingdom in this category. It's not very fun, I'll tell you that. This trick coming up is basically how we make Snow Kingdom bearable. This kingdom forces you to go down 4 hallways, and each hallway has a story moon in it, and each story moon opens up one of the barriers on the hole in the middle. And that's how you're supposed to be able to get into the final chamber and finish world peace in this kingdom. But instead, what you can do is this. Using that same moon clip mechanic, we're able to get outside of the walls, into the out-of-bounds section, and into that hallway without doing any of those hallways. This is good for 2 reasons. The first reason is that those rooms are slow. The second reason is that when you open up the moon rock later on in the Snow Kingdom, each of those 4 rooms actually gets a bonus moon on the inside. So, by leaving those rooms for the post-game later on, we essentially skip having to visit them twice, which saves, obviously, a lot of time. Now, this is the Bound Bowl. The Bound Bowl, for some reason, is like the barrier to entry for World Peace. I don't know why they made, like, this isn't a boss fight. This doesn't even seem like anybody's in real danger. It's just kind of like a thing that you have to do. It's just a fun little mini game. Usually when we do these speedrun attempts on my channel, we'll do a little guessing game where people can guess the time that I get on these races. Obviously, we're not going to do it this time because you guys already know what I'm going to get on this race. You can just go watch the VOD. Whoa, 52-17. Everybody in the chat got it right. How the heck does that happen? Oh my gosh. So there are 4 pots up on this ceiling here, and 3 of those pots grow the seeds in 20 minutes, just like I mentioned before. But one of them actually takes about an hour to grow. So it's important that when I throw the seed, I don't plant it in that pot. That pot is like the front rightmost one. So we missed it, which is good. So this moon here, you see we're spawning all of the notes, and we get them all, but then we actually just turn off to the right. We veer off, and we leave the moon there. When we grab this story moon here, we break open the seal, and we actually spin pound boost right off the side of the cliff and right past this moon again. Like, why did we do that? Don't worry about that. So we've captured this Gushin boy. You can refill his water in 3 ways. You can get in a body of water, you can grab a power moon, or you can grab a checkpoint. So because of that, we're going to actually abuse this little gushy boy and kind of carry him around the kingdom so that we can get around really fast. So using that checkpoint there to refill the water so that we can bring him around the back of this cliff. Now getting up this side of the cliff is usually really difficult. It requires like platforming and is really slow, but if you have the gushy boy, you can kind of just go over the top. Use the power moon one more time to refill his water, and then after all that he's done for us, we're going to bring him over to the hot spring and then really just like ground pound directly on his face. And just like a little known fact is that you can do that, and when you do ground pound on him, it actually like opens up the pool of water underneath you, so you can just ground pound safely into the water. Now, this is the last seal that we needed, so now we're going to go ahead and fight Brigadier Mollusk Lancer III Dafana Bablaine. Yes, that's his real name. This fight is probably my favorite boss fight out of all of them, and it's pretty linear. I always know where he's going to go next, so you can see me like lining myself up before he even gets there. There's that moon, by the way. We finally decided that it was good enough for us to grab. And we have to check off a couple of like invisible flags to make sure that he still follows us around the kingdom and continues the boss fight. And we need to beat him to the hot spring, because if we beat him to the hot spring and we start spraying him as soon as he gets here, this happens. And he kind of just like clips directly into the hot spring. If you don't do this, then he takes a really slow path around, because obviously he's not supposed to clip through the hecking hot spring. Now, this sub-area is actually really scary. Like, if you have never seen this sub-area before, or, like, you're approaching it as a casual, you're probably going to be like, whoa, danger, settle down. Because I just kind of use the lava boost and I jump across. Now, you might be thinking, Darker Side has a lot of moons and you complete it in 3 hours, but you're not collecting moons very fast here. And you're probably right about that. The moons in the first visit aren't really that quick at all. But the reason for that is because of all the setup that we're doing. The setup really is what makes this category what it is. Because when we get to the post game, we're going to be collecting moons at a rate of about 1 every 20 seconds at the slowest. If a moon takes longer than 20 seconds, then it probably didn't make it into the route in the post game. Now, Teal, probably one of the worst boss fights in the entire game, mainly to do with the hitboxes. The hitboxes are not very friendly. I actually got a pretty good fight here, but especially that last hit, you can be like rubbing just like this. The fireball is just like smearing up against Teal's face, and Teal just kind of sits there and takes it. But yeah, once we're done lunch and we go to Ruined, and Ruined is actually one of the 2 kingdoms. There's only 2 kingdoms that we don't revisit, and that is Ruined and also Cloud. And that's just because they're really small kingdoms. In the revisits, you open up the moon rocks, and they only have about 10 moons each, which is not a whole lot. Now, this little toad hint art here in the ground is kind of important. This category requires 2 coins for 2 reasons. One of the reasons is that, you know, they're used to buy moons in the shops. Some shop moons are fast. The other reason is Toadette has another achievement for us that requires us to collect 1,000 coins in total. So in order for us to get one of Toadette's free moons, we need 1,000 coins. These little hint arts were actually released by Nintendo in a soft patch throughout the game over time, and ground pounding them where they are located reveals 200 coins just for free. So because of this one that happens to exist immediately, like right in the boss fight, we can very, very safely get over 1,000 coins, no problem. Now, this trick here has actually been in debate for any percent for a long time. Using this bird to do a capture warp strategy, we grab the moon down here, and then Cappy warps us right back up to the roof. Saves the time of having to climb all the way up. It is a really fast moon. So now this chunk coming up here is probably one of my favorite pieces of movement in the entire speedrun. And you actually see it in just about every speedrun as well. Let's see if I actually did it right. No, I didn't. Okay, well, that's fine. We'll ignore the first part. But this Shards moon is actually required by the game. It is connected to a story moon. So because of that, every category needs to get it. And there's obviously been a lot of different ways and possibilities of going about getting this moon. And the current fastest way is probably one of my favorite pieces of like movement in the entire run. You guys like the capture warp strategy that was displayed at the very beginning? Well, this kingdom in particular actually has 3. The second one is coming up right here. So this is what is quote-unquote very affectionately referred to as Bowser Dram. But you set Cappy up right over top of this pylon, grab the moon, and we're immediately warped back to it. Then we come onto the souvenir island. We grab a hold of this Jizo statue. And the Jizo statue spawns a moon here, but it also spawns a secret moon hidden under the ground. We're going to hop out of the Jizo statue and get back up into the mainland, grab this moon first, and then same thing, throw Cappy out, dive at this moon, home Cappy into the pylon that's above ground, and warp directly out of the hole. We're approaching what is arguably the absolute hardest trick in the entire video game. You can tell it's hard because the name of the trick is exceptionally long. This is Fast Timpani Neo Poke Dram that you're about to witness. Exceptionally difficult. Couldn't have done that without extreme focus. Now, this fight obviously doesn't change from category to category. There's no hidden moons in the boss arena. And I kind of like this fight because it is literally a platforming fight. The boss itself is literally a platforming stage. So the first order of business is to climb up the side of the leg using the pegs on the side. And they have weird hitboxes, so it's actually harder to climb up than it looks. You get rid of the first bubble on the right side, then you get rid of the bubble on the back. Now, the bubbles in this phase are currently invulnerable to hit. You can't actually hit these bubbles while he's running around the stage like this, so you have to wait until this moment right here. When he bucks back, that's when the bubbles are available to hit again. Then we set ourselves up for a trick called Target Acquired, which is basically just diving back and hitting the bubble as soon as it's available. Okay, coming up here is one of Odyssey's most famous speedrun tricks. It's one that was developed on day 1. This is what we call the Moon Cave skip. So instead of going in the Moon Cave, you can actually go around the back, jump on the Sphinx's head, do a ground pound, and use wall jumps specifically in certain spots to just skip the entire cave sequence. That saves about 3.5 minutes. All right, so this fight with Bowser is exactly the same as the first one. The only difference is that Bowser has a phase in between where he spits fire at you. This fire is exceptionally dangerous. One-hit KO, ruins your entire speedrun. If you get hit by this fire, it actually soft locks your switch, and you have to get a new one. So it's definitely in our best interest that we avoid the fire. And even though we've defeated Bowser now, after these last couple of punches, it triggers another event, and the moon starts imploding on itself. It's very dramatic. It's very violent. So we need to escape. And the best way to escape is to, use the corpse of our fallen enemies and morbidly use them to our advantage. So we actually capture Bowser, and we bring him through the Moon Kingdom, and he's got, power and strength to bust through rock walls, which is very convenient. This part here it got a couple skips of its own. So this is the 2D skip right here. You can do this jump to basically skip going all the way to the right and all the way to the left. That saves about 2 seconds. And then you can do that same sequence of movement right there. That saves probably about 0.2. Not a huge difference. And then this is the pillar room, the final screen of the main game. And we try and throw as many fireballs as we can over to the pillar on the right side. That's just to bust it open earlier. If we can manage to break open that pillar earlier, then we only have 3 that we need to swipe our claws at. Now, if you're curious about the time of this speedrun, all of the stuff that has happened up to this point, this is a 3-hour speedrun, and we're about 1 hour and 22 minutes in. Now, this Toad that we're about to talk to here is very important. Princess Peach provides us with a lot of really quick moons, and by talking to that Toad, she goes on a little bit of a tourist vacation around the world, and every place that we find her in, she'll give us a power moon, so that's another bit of setup there. So this is where the painting chain begins. The painting chain is really important because it's a really quick way to move from kingdom to kingdom. Usually, if you want to go to another kingdom, you have to go to the Odyssey. You have to dump all of your moons into the Odyssey. You wait for the Odyssey to power up. The Odyssey goes, and the balloon gets bigger, and the number changes, and then you get in the Odyssey and pick another kingdom, and then the kingdom is loaded in. It's obviously really slow to do that. So we use the painting chain to our advantage, starting here. This is where the painting chain begins. There's a couple fast moons that we can get on our way over to the moon rock, and the moon rock is something that kind of needs to be explained as well now that we're here. The reason that we had to achieve world peace in all of the kingdoms that we visited is because this moon rock does not actually open for us until we do. If we were to come back to this kingdom without having already completed world peace, there would be no moon rock to open. We would still have to achieve world peace to get it. And it's good because you saw the map open up and some blinky things on the map. Those are the locations of new moons. And a lot of the moons are like this one, where it's literally just sitting in the air. That's not a challenge, but it's also really free for a speedrun because it's a moon. But as you can see, the moons are coming rapid fire now. If the moon is any slower than 20 seconds, then it doesn't get included in the run. Because we open up the moon rock, these little hallways that lead into these sub-areas are important because they have 3 moons in them now instead of just 2. If we were to visit these rooms in the early game, they would only have 2 moons for us to collect instead of 3. Now, this room is actually really interesting. At the top of this mountain, Rango is waiting for you. Rango is waiting to fight you, but because we're visiting him in the post-game and we never fought him, he just turns into this icy mound that you just ground pound on, and he's done. And also there's another moon sitting on a platform for some reason. So this kingdom, because of the sequence breaks, is actually really busted. Most of these rooms that you're going in have some sort of puzzle associated with them to get the story moon to spawn in them. This one was beat Rango. The next one that we're going to enter, you have to collect moon shards. But because the game is being tricked into thinking that we've already completed that stuff, they just let the story moons sit on the platforms for us to collect. You can see that there's no moon shards in this room to collect at all. So we're gonna go about collecting the extra moons in this room, and then we're gonna go get the story moon, and we're on our way. This is the end of Snow Kingdom. We've collected all the moons that we need. We need to get into the next painting. Now, the next painting usually requires us to get one of those Taifus to blow a platform close to this wall over here. up to this painting, as you can see. But I'm actually attempting a trick here called Blowy Noey. You can manipulate this wall's textures. Some of it is considered like a slope. So you can slide onto Cappy and get a vault like that in order to get up to that painting without using the capture. All right, so we were talking about Dino Skip earlier. This is what Dino Skip is. Doing that. But we skipped having to do that in the first visit and saved about 9 seconds, which is pretty cool. So after we get this moon, we actually do a spin pound and we capture this big chain jump. And then we just leave him. And the reason that we do that is because one of the moons that we can get in this game is related to getting captures, a certain amount of unique captures. Toadette gives us an achievement for having gotten 35. And if we don't capture that big chain jump, we only get 34. So it's very important that we capture him in order to get a free moon from Toadette later. So as cool as the post-game is, there's not a whole lot of tricks going on. It's basically we've set ourselves up for success, and we're just collecting the fast moons in like a little bit of like a paper trail. You know, we've lined ourselves up for this moment. The whole early game was setting ourselves up in a way that all of these moons are just sitting out in the open in a chain waiting for us to get them all. All right, now this moon is actually a little bit more complicated than it looks. All it really looks like is I'm throwing a chain chomp at a series of rocks in the corner and busting it open. But we're actually not supposed to use that chain chomp to get that moon. It just so happens that like that chain chomp can just barely reach, but only at a very specific angle, and if you pull back the chain chomp in a specific way. It used to be like the bane of our existence. Now we have a setup that allows us to get it like basically every time. Used to be that it would take like sometimes 10 tries. It would actually be a run killer sometimes. All right. This is actually a pretty new addition to Darker Side. It's been known about for a long time. But essentially, going into this vault and then doing this really scary roll off the side just barely gets us enough distance to make it onto this roof. And this room, you might be thinking, how the heck is this room fast? I remember having to take this Jizo statue on an entire journey to the left, to the right. Just so happens that, you know, this game maybe didn't consider that people were good at platforming. Because if you do a triple jump into a cap dive, you can just get into this little alcove. And then from this little alcove, you can do this. And suddenly you've got both moons. And it makes the room very, very fast. We're approaching this bird. He's a fast boy. It's RNG whether he's looking at you or not. So sometimes you can throw Cappy and catch him. Luckily, there is a backup strat. If you just go to where the bird was standing and you go into first-person mode, for some reason the bird just doesn't, you know, he doesn't think that the camera's on him or something, and he'll just respawn right where you are. And that's kind of an easy way to back that moon up. So upcoming here is a trick that was discovered probably about a year ago now. It's almost a year old, which is pretty crazy. But it was discovered that you could clip out of bounds using a fish capture. There's an invisible wall here that kind of prevents you from going to the outer edges of the screen, but by positioning the fish in such a way, you can actually just kind of shimmy past that invisible wall and into the out of bounds. In this category, it makes use of that by getting this out of bounds and also going into the Sphinx Vault immediately afterwards, not having to do the quiz, which is really handy. The Eel Boy lives in this little cavern up ahead. By tilting the camera down and then panning it forward... Oh, I actually really ruined it. I messed this up real bad, but there is a really cool strat you can do here. If you don't suck, you can actually do that entire part damageless without stopping for a second. Now we make our way to Wooded, and if you guys remember from earlier on, Wooded Kingdom is a kingdom that we purposefully skipped on achieving world peace. The world is actually in turmoil right now. The world is in just complete and utter chaos because we haven't actually achieved world peace in Wooded yet. But the reason that we left it for now is because this painting spits us out right at the top of the kingdom, and then we make our way up to the top of the kingdom here and do the little target practice, and now we're on our way, which is much, much faster than having to climb up from the bottom all the way to the top manually. There is one thing you can do, and it all has to do with manipulating the movement patterns of the speedy nut boy, as we call him. So when you capture an uproot, typically his movements are pretty slow. When he runs along the ground and he jumps and hits the ground, he'll like stop moving for a second and then continue running. He also doesn't jump very far, but by using that little spawn platform that's kind of like near where the uproot is, you can actually land on it and jump off of it in a specific set of ways. Suddenly he's jumping a lot farther, and when he hits the ground, he's not stopping. He's just running. This is what we call speeding up boy. And if you can get it by the second phase of the fight, which is optimal, then typically you can save a couple of seconds off of this fight just from that. Here's a good time for me to point out the fact that we haven't been to sand again yet. Sand is still upcoming. That allows us to look at this hint art before we get to sand again. If we had changed the painting order, if we had chosen lake first, we wouldn't be in wooded right now, we'd be in lake right now. That means that we would have had to look at the hint art sometime in the first visit, and it just doesn't fit optimally. And now here's a really cool jump coming up, very scary jump. So just gonna take these rocket flowers and do a bit of like a sacrificial jump off the side. So it's important for a couple different reasons. First of all, it's a fast way to get to Captain Toad. But secondly, it gives us this pipe, and this pipe sends us up to the observation deck all the way up here. The original way to get up to this observation deck is to do a really slow timer challenge-like puzzle that spawns a couple of elevators from the backside, and we just get to skip that by doing this. And Wooded is a really interesting kingdom because as a casual approaching Wooded Kingdom, it didn't really make sense how it was put together. Like, in my brain, it was a bit of a puzzle to solve because, like, I knew each of the individual chunks of Wooded Kingdom for what they were, but you don't realize that they're all kind of, like, stacked on top of each other and, like, so closely compact, which makes moons like this kind of interesting. You're like, wow, this is actually where this is, you know what I mean? Because if you just go to the left from here, suddenly you're in the lake area where, you know, the bottom of the climb is. This is always a really cool sub-area. This sub-area has been done like this in all categories of this speedrun for about as long as I can remember. But basically, the water is rising and falling on a cycle, so you're doing your best to get through this room as fast as you possibly can. Now, the warp away from this sub-area is actually extremely important. It turns out that a couple of birds in this speedrun are flying around the kingdom, and they fly around on a global cycle, for the most part. They're flying around, and in order to get them, you just have to meet them at a specific point in the kingdom and throw your hat at them. So in order for us to do this effectively and optimally, typically what we want to do is try and cram as much moons in between a warp or leaving a sub-area or something like that, as much time between that and getting the bird as we can. So as soon as I did that warp, as soon as that warp happened, it reset its spawn point and started flying around the kingdom. So it's absolutely important that everything I am doing here is done absolutely optimally. Because if I slow down even for like a second or two, that bird is going to have a second or two advantage on me. I'm basically racing the bird to the point that it's at. And, you know, you might be thinking, well, you're doing a lot of stuff. Like, you know, this is probably like almost a minute's worth of stuff. So, like, couldn't you just meet it somewhere else? It just so happens that, like, if you can cram all this stuff in before the bird, it makes it optimal, right? Rather than meet the bird somewhere where maybe there's nothing going on. And so now the race with the bird is not done yet. Up to this point, we've been racing the bird, but you can actually see him glowing and flying towards us. And just to make it a little bit more interesting, I'm actually going to catch him in the air. Right below me is a zone that if I fall into that zone, it takes me to the deep woods. If you're in the deep woods, you cannot warp out of the deep woods. The only way to leave the deep woods is by those big long beanstalks that you saw when we were there earlier. So it's really not good to fall in there. There have been a handful of runs that I've lost by trying to catch that bird and missing the moon that he spawns and just falling into the deep woods and my run's over. So a lot scarier than it probably looks. Now this moon might not look like a whole lot. We're just ground pounding a spot and spawning a moon. But if I actually ledge grab right there, it sets Mario's standing position above the ledge rather than below it. So by grabbing the ledge, I grab the moon and I'm actually just like instantly warped up to the ledge so I don't have to climb it later. Now, something to explain is this dog. This dog that I just smacked in the face with Cappy, he's actually not very fast. What he does is once he sees Mario, he heads off to go and dig up a moon. But he's really slow, and the moon is really far away. So what we do is we activate the dog, and then we keep the camera on him so that he continues to run over to his spot. And by doing that, we can fit in a bunch of other stuff, like talking to the music toad and activating the moon on this fountain, getting the moon from the seed, and we can do all of that in the meantime while he's running around doing his thing. And then by the time we've completed all of that, The dog has dug up his little dig spot, and the moon is ready for us. Now, camera manipulation is something that I haven't really talked about, but it's extremely important in this kingdom. So this game has an interesting way of like preserving memory. If things are not on the screen, sometimes they don't exist. This is another really good example. We're approaching the ruins here. We're going to grab a couple moons, but we're going to make sure that our camera is pointed to the left, in that direction. You can see I'm kind of fighting with it, and then now I'm turning my camera over. That's because this platform, this moving platform here, is tied to the direction that the camera's facing. And by turning my camera at exactly the right moment, I was able to get the platform exactly where I want. But the camera manipulation is actually not over yet. There's another thing that is completely dependent on camera. And so you're going to see that I'm purposefully facing my camera this way now. Sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. And do it a little bit more here. Basically, all of this is calculated. The direction that my camera is pointing in this particular chunk of the run is all intentional and on purpose. A little bit there. I'm basically trying to manipulate a certain part of the Jaxie poison swamp over here. You see this bird flying towards us? That bird is actually frozen in time every time the camera comes off of him. So I have kind of a mental note in my head of how much time the camera needs to be pointed over at this poison swamp for him to be in exactly the right place. And this particular camera manipulation starts all the way back at the employees only room back in the town. So you can see this bird is actually just sitting right here. The idea here is that the bird needs to be right here so that you can get this moon, then you can get the moon on the island behind it, then you can get the moon on the timer challenge, and you can get all of those moons in a matter of like 5 seconds. Now, there are 3 fishing moons in this run. The reason that we do them is A, because if you get a first bite, they're really fast, and B, the 3 of them together combine for another Toadette Moon, so you get 4 for the price of 3. Honestly, Sand is so much fun to speedrun because it's like cycle after cycle after cycle. You're manipulating the camera to adjust some of the cycles, but this one in particular, this cycle does not start until this warp. As soon as we get out of this checkpoint, this cycle in the round tower is going. And so everything that I'm doing here is also calculated. I have to go at a certain speed to make this work. I just barely dodged damage from those bullet bills, but it was really important that I just barely did, because now I'm going to be able to set myself up for this big jump and land on the platform like that, skipping part of the puzzle and probably saving like 6 or 7 seconds. All right, so coming up here is the first of the 2 hint art moons. You're going to see this was the reason we went to Wooded first, so that this moon would be here and available for us in Sand. What happens if I accidentally visited Lake first? Now, that's an interesting question. I would lose 3 seconds. Theoretically, all that would happen is I lose 3 seconds, but I would usually reset my run because my splits are in a certain order. And because my splits are in a certain order, it would completely ruin the rest of my splits. Now, this timer challenge is a little bit tricky. So we were talking about Toadette achievements, right? One of the Toadette achievements is doing a certain amount of timer challenge moons. The amount of timer challenges that we have in the run is like perfectly the right amount for the Toadette achievement to work. If we land in the purple poison, we die, and it's pretty slow to come all the way back here to do this moon. But if we miss it, then we actually lose 2 moons instead of 1. So it's kind of important that we get that moon without dying. But then we also use the purple poison to death warp back to the top of the tower. So we're going to capture these binoculars, and these binoculars reveal that the Sphinx is flying around in Metro Kingdom for no reason. But he does spit out a moon, and just... hold on. It's coming. 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 Okay. It's finally here. Just so happens that moon is like barely fast enough, but it's also worth it because it's one of the captures that we were talking about. So that's why we keep it in the run. All right. Coming up here is a trick called Scooter Clip. This has been in speedruns for quite a while. Essentially, the scooter has hidden motion control mechanics. If you like tilt the controller basically upside down like this, you can make the scooter tilt more to the side than is originally intended with the control stick. And if you do that in conjunction with the control stick, you actually tilt the scooter over just enough to clip Mario's big fat nose into the side of the cage, and you don't need to bother with the RC car guy. Now here's a cool little thing that I do. I haven't seen a whole lot of other runners do this, but it is pretty fast to do it this way. Using this flight of stairs to kind of skip the whole purpose of the timer challenge makes the timer challenge just a touch faster. All right, now we're entering the slots room. The slots are not at all RNG. If you hit all of the slots as soon as the pictures become available, they will be power moons, and you can always get power moons 100% of the time. So with a well-timed spin throw, you're able to get the power moon 100% of the time on the slots machine. All right, so we've warped over to, this is called the Commemorative Park. And this entire area probably wouldn't be very interesting to us if it didn't have a bunch of timers kind of tied into one another. So first off, we're going to activate the dog. The dog is going to go find a sniffy spot, and by himself, he's obviously very slow. But we've left the scrap moon, the pile of rubble that's just sitting here. It's very fast for us to get it while we're waiting for the dog. There's also a bird that flies around the park, and it's quite fast to just grab that bird while we're waiting for the dog to dig up his spot. Another one of those, like, 3 for the price of 2 situations. It's great. So now here's another bird cycle. This bird cycle is not nearly as difficult to manage. Basically, you're just going to roll off of the building to get this moon hanging in the air. And a little bit of a tricky spacing challenge here. You got to land right on that light post in order to catch the bird as he's flying by. This is bullet building. This room is infamous in speedrunning. We're on a cycle as soon as we get in here. There's some bullet bills spawning from the launchers back there. We have to do the beginning part of the room really fast, and then we can set ourselves up for an up throw, and we're going to capture that bullet bill instantly, which is great. Really fast. Now we need this Goomba Boy. Goombas have, like, really strange momentum in this game. If you land a Goomba's jump on a slant and then jump immediately again with a buffer, it just, like, takes all of that momentum and just throws it at you. You just, like, you can go flying. You just go absolutely nuts. This room, obviously these waves are on a cycle, and my goal is to get to the end of this room as fast as I possibly can so that I can make the cycle. This used to be a really hard cycle, but I think it's partially due to the fact that people were trying to get on that middle platform rather than the ones at the beginning. And that's a really tough thing to do. So I always just kind of went for those platforms there, and I've never had a problem with that cycle again. Here's a nifty little trick. I learned this from Timpani. Shoutouts to Timpani. So you get up the first one with a dive, then you do a spin jump. Anytime you can incorporate a spin jump, like they're kind of slow jumps. You rise and flutter really slowly, but they're pretty cool. So this here is the last link in the painting chain. There's actually one more stop. This painting chain goes full circle. You started in Mushroom, you went to Seaside and onwards, and it actually ends up back in Mushroom from Luncheon. But it was discovered, and it might be a little bit tough to explain, so bear with me. You have to visit one kingdom 3 times. So you either go to Mushroom 3 times because you have to end in Mushroom to get the Toadette achievements, or you have to do Luncheon 3 times. And Luncheon 3 times would mean dumping all of your moons that you've collected so far into the Odyssey while you're in Luncheon here, and then returning to Luncheon later, and then going through the painting into Mushroom. By doing Luncheon 3 times rather than Mushroom 3 times, we actually skip a little bit of text in one of those Odyssey transition cutscenes, so it's about 3 seconds of time saved to do Luncheon 3 times versus Mushroom. So you see on that island over there, that's Captain Toad. By waiting for that timer challenge to finish at exactly the right time, doing a triple jump, we are able to get over here without taking any damage. That gap is usually not small enough for us to make it any other way, unless we have Cappy. But Cappy is hiding in the timer challenge. So we had to time our triple jump exactly right. So here we are, warping to the Odyssey, and there we go. Dumping our moons into the Odyssey. 397, that's the amount of moons that we need. Cap Kingdom is probably one of the scariest kingdoms in the entire run. There's a lot of, like, death-defying jumps. This is one of them. This is the very first thing you do when you get here. Yeah. That's what you need to do to get over to the moon rock fast. So we need this Paragoomba here to get the next moon. But this Paragoomba's too low, so you actually use this danger sign to get yourself some height. Just enough to get your feet over the platform so you can get up here. So after talking to Captain Toad, we're just gonna, I don't know, for some reason jump off the side of the cap tower. Turns out that there is a moon over there. So we do another death-defying jump to get there. Not so death-defying because we actually do die afterwards, but that's okay because our last checkpoint was at the top of the tower. This is very important. Right as soon as we respawn in here, we've got another bird cycle. And this is the tightest bird cycle of them all. If we mess up even a second worth of the movement here, then the bird will not be in an optimal place for us to grab it the way that I'm going to here. So everything up to this point has been very, very fast. If we were any slower, this bird cycle would not work. You can see that the bird is actually that glowing dot flying away from us. And it just so happens that by doing everything as fast as we possibly can, we catch him at like exactly the right moment for him to be in between the danger sign and the world again, which is like, it's perfect. The ideal thing that you're supposed to do is ground pound the stairs and reveal the block and then go give him your hat and like line him up. But instead, you can like beat him here in order for that moon to just spawn immediately, essentially. Now, the next kingdom that we visit is the Moon Kingdom, and we probably wouldn't visit the Moon Kingdom if it wasn't for the fact that it is just like a setup kingdom of sorts. It by itself, we only go here for 5 moons. There's not very many moons in this kingdom that we actually need, but they're all really, really closely huddled to the Odyssey, which makes them pretty optimal to grab, and a lot of them are associated with setup from somewhere else or to somewhere else. The very first moon that we get in this kingdom is, drumroll please, our good friend the tourist. I don't know why he's on the moon. I don't know how a taxi gets here, but I mean he is, so that's fine. And getting this moon here means that he's going to jet set off to somewhere else. This sub-area in particular is a very scary one. We're obviously breaking the normal mechanics of this room by jumping across to this island, leaving that Podoboo there so that we can immediately jump into the cannon right there as well. All right, so we have finally accomplished our painting chain. We're finally back in Mushroom Kingdom. This is our last stop before we go to Darker Side. All of the setup that we've been doing for this kingdom kind of comes to a head here. It was important for us to go to the Moon Kingdom because the tourist is also here, and the tourist wouldn't be here if we didn't visit him on the moon. And now we're going to do a run that has been known about for a long... or not a run. We're going to do a trick that has been known about for a really long time. Using that Goomba's weird, zany momentum, you can kind of just jump across that gap and get a really fast moon. The intended way to get this moon is to stack all the Goombas up, empty the moat of all of its pegs, and then just, like, stand in the moat. We finally arrived at Toadette, and here we are, just standing here. She gives us moons. There's nothing very special to say about it, but, you know, all of the reasons that she's giving us moons are because we've done stuff up till this point, and we get 31 from her. And these are the last 31 that we need. Once this is done, we move on to the Darker Side. One thing I'd like to note about Toadette is that every time we talk to her, we're actually initiating first-person mode. You see the camera kind of like snap strangely. If we weren't to do that, the camera would very slowly pan out for a second. So because there's 31 of those moons, every time we go into first person, we save 0.2 seconds. And that adds up. Now, Darker Side is kind of this game's hardest level. Every Mario game up since like Super Mario Bros. 2 has had a sort of post-game where there's like a hidden or bonus level that is designed to be harder and test your limits in platforming, and this is Super Mario Odyssey's version of that. So the first thing that I want to mention actually is that these frogs that we're approaching up here, on the very original version of this game, 1.0, you used to be able to manipulate these frogs in a way that you would capture it and it would start swimming in the air, and you could swim all the way to the final island. That used to save about 3 minutes. It's not available in this version, but it doesn't matter, because 1.3 has overclocked loads, and those loads are actually enough to counterbalance the time that you would save in 1.0 doing this frog skip trick. But it's also what makes 1.3 the definitive perfect version of this game. It's easily available for everybody, and it's the fastest, so you can't really argue with that. This section here is supposed to be like a 2.5D area, but if you like jump away from the camera and then back into it, you can avoid that and skip the entire like wall jumping section. All you really need to do is jump and dive, and you'll always land on these moving platforms. Now this part is pretty tricky. There's actually a faster way to do this than the way I'm going to show you here. You can use the uproot to get to a part of the level that's kind of up and to the right. You can kind of see it on your screen there. Take like a frozen waterway area past the level, and it's a little bit faster than what I'm doing here, but this is also a very safe and consistent way for me to do it, using the uproot to go over the top of the level. And this Yoshi part's pretty boring. You use him to traverse this vertical section. It is actually faster to use your tongue to flick back and forth like that. It looks kind of just like I'm doing nonsense, but it is faster. So we're actually on top of this platform. We do a ground pound throw to get Cappy onto the scarecrow underneath us. The puzzle starts to spawn in, but we just kind of avoid it by staying on top. This is Glide On. And past Glide On is a series of fork flicks over some lava, as you can see down there. Then after that is a pipe, and in the pipe is a section where you do some really intense platforming. There's even a 2D section with Donkey Kong. After you come out of the pipe, you go into the painting that you see on that island over there, and you do Bowser. But this game perhaps didn't really think that you could do this. By preserving your height, you can shake the controller to preserve your height as Glide On. And if you happen to do that right out of one of those tornadoes, you can literally fly Glide On right past all of these platforming puzzles and literally just skip the entire rest of this dungeon. And here we are. This is basically the end. The game is saying thank you. There's nothing left to do. There is just 2 more things, really. The first is this. Entirely unnecessary. Probably only saves about a second. It's called the No You Skip. Gotta love that. And then we just gotta climb this tower. And as easy as this looks, you're a frog in moon gravity, and that makes it kind of annoying to traverse. The frog is very floaty, but I'm actually planning my jumps specifically so that I can get the maximum height up the building as fast as possible. And then Cappy tells like a really sappy story, and we kind of just skip over all of that by jumping up the pole instead of climbing it like you're supposed to, and voila. We have our multi-moon. All of those things combined into one speedrun is what makes this possible in 3 hours, 8 minutes, and 25 seconds. That is Darker Side. And you might be wondering, well, what is there to do now? Where does this category go from here? It just turns out that like right now is a time in the speedrunning career of Super Mario Odyssey where everybody's really interested in Darker Side. There is a best theoretical time sheet being developed right now. People are working on breaking the run into little segments, like literally 1 moon at a time, just to like grind down those segments by like 0.5 of a second, for example. The current best theoretical time that is possible for Darker Side as it stands is 2 hours, 59 minutes, and some change. So theoretically, sub 3 Darker Side is in fact possible. Obviously have a really long way to go. It is possible to bring this category down as far as that, and probably a lot further as well. There will always be routing changes, there will always be new discoveries. This is speedrunning, this is how it works. So I'm excited that there are a lot of people that are very interested in this category, and maybe this explanation has made you interested in the category and makes you want to search it up as well. And if that is the case, then I think I've done my job. So